This episode contains visual demonstrations. We highly recommend watching the video on our YouTube channel. Welcome to the place of rest, where our aim is to give you language that helps you displace the growing confusion, chaos, and dis-ease of our times. My name is Jonathan Boyce, and it's my pleasure to bring to you today's episode. Virginia Dixon and Dr. Glenn King discuss Dr. King's history and what led him to learning a physics-based, non-invasive way to support the body's natural healing processes. We hope you enjoy today's conversation.
Well, today we're going to talk about the natural science of physics, known as energetics. And we will be speaking to Dr. Glenn King, who studied physics, and he basically focuses on the physics approach rather than the biological approach to understanding bioelectric conductive systems relating to health. So what an honor to have you, Dr. King. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. There are great things that are changing, and I have very high hopes. So we've always needed this, and I've been working with this for decades to try to get the information out there, and we've actually had, multiple TV interviews, magazines, everything else, lecturing at hospitals, universities across the country and the world. But it kind of feels like you're at the North Pole with an ice pick.
Yes.
Just barely chipping away, because the majority of everybody you run across says, I've never heard about this. So you kind of have to start from the beginning. But with the change that's coming with the government, and I have very high hopes in a lot of aspects of that we're going to have the freedoms that we should have had all along, and the opportunity to get the word out there for things that help people that do not harm. They're non-toxic, non-invasive, and they actually are consistent in producing results. And that's just very exciting to me.
40 years is a long time. We share a similar pilgrimage in different plots in the same land. So I'm so honored to have this discussion with you. Tell us what this is all about. Explain to us how you got here.
Wow. I'll try to make a summary.
Yes, summary.
That's quite a long story. But in essence, most people are doing what they're doing because of some personal experience. And I started studying natural health, basically first about diet and nutrition, when I was actually 19. But later on in life, I had an accident that ended up with lumbar surgery between L4 and L5, removed a disc and part of a vertebra. And I will say I'm the last one to say that you should get surgery. But there are times when surgery is necessary. I mean, like I tell people, if you're in an accident and your arm's over here and something's over there, don't call me. You need the best surgeon you can get. But we can work with them through the surgery and afterwards for phenomenal recovery. So the surgeon did a great job. I've got no complaints there. But it created, and this was at a time where they typically cut you up and down the back, but he did microsurgery. He was way ahead of his time. And praise God that he didn't put any metallic objects in me. He didn't put a cage, he didn't bolt anything, and he just left it naturally. He just took out the problems. And it healed, and I had problems, but the major problem was 3 years later, I developed grand mal epileptic seizures. And that led to coming to on the first one, and an ambulance was already there because somebody called. Went to the hospital. I'm in their hands. They run all the tests for 3 days. They can't find, first they want to look for things like brain tumor and such. They couldn't find any physiological reason why I was having such extended grand mal seizures. But they put me on medications, and I was kind of destitute and ignorant in a lot of ways. So I kind of trusted them. And they went from one medication to another. Bottom line, while the seizures were getting worse, they could not do anything to find out a cause or to maintain or to resolve. But through my research and everything that I did, because by that point I had already studied acupuncture, diet, nutrition, and a variety of things. And I tried all those things for me, things that actually have worked for other people for seizures, but they didn't work for me. And I'm wondering why? And I had been exposed to something from Japan, introduced through a nurse before that. And my opinion after studying acupuncture was kind of bah humbug, because they were talking about, well, you touch here and you touch there and it's going to do this, that, and the other. And I'm thinking, it can't be that simple. So in my incapacitated state at that time, because I was getting to the point of status epilepticus, where you go from one seizure into another. And a big problem there is you don't breathe during the midst of that seizure. And you get lack of oxygen in the brain and brain cells die. So I was in a state to where my memory was as short as seconds at time. You'd get up to go to the restroom and you'd forget why you're walking across the room. And with other things, I couldn't talk. All my words were slurred. I could make all kind of noises, but I couldn't articulate any particular words. So it was a very dire situation. And I had exhausted everything else. I pulled out the notes that I first said, bah humbug. And I said, what do I got to lose? And I started working on myself. And in studying that, I made the connection. It still took a while. I made the connection with the scar tissue and a pathway that diagonally goes through that area. That's one of the main pathways that leads up to your head and the brain. I said, well, maybe that's it. So I started working on myself, and I guess to make it short, within 3 months, I turned the whole thing around.
Wow.
And in that
No
process,
more seizures? No more seizures?
No more seizures.
Wow.
So here's another thing. I learned how to stop a seizure before it happens or if it's happening. Of course, if it's happening on me with a grand mal, I can't do that. If somebody else is around, they can do that on me. And then to stop the cause of the seizures, which for me was that scar tissue, and get energy generated to circulate through there again. But the other problem was I had so much brain damage. I still wasn't able to talk right. My memory was all messed up. And so I worked on myself with the same process of how to recover my brain, which obviously
Wow.
I did.
Wow.
And that took about 3 months.
Did you use lasers at all?
I used lasers prior to that.
Okay. And they didn't work?
They didn't work.
Okay. Tell us about, well, you develop the story as you see fit that will suit us best to digest the immensity of what you're going to share with us today.
Well, what comes to mind when you say that is that after I recovered, I was truly amazed. And to make it short, I'm like, what was that? What made such profound difference for me when everything else was exhausted? So some people tell me you shouldn't use that word, but the reality is I got into very fanatical study. All my waking hours, I studied everything that I could get. I'm a why person. And
right.
I don't accept the first answer. Like if you give me an answer, then I'm why for that. You give me another answer, I'm why for that.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up studying everything that I could that I learned from Japan and people that knew what they could at the time, because the roots of this, the man died in 1960. And he did this.
Excuse me, the roots of this, the original author of this technique, the original
I would call it that.
Researcher? Okay.
Yes. And what he called it was discovering what we had priorly known. So he didn't call it something of his device. And I'll translate in my terminology of what I call it now. It is discovering God's creation of how we function. Because we are spirit. and we're in a physical body. And we have a mind, so that's mental. We have emotions. And we also are an energetic being. It's part of what makes all of this work. In physics and in science, there is nothing that exists in God's creation on this planet or elsewhere that is not, in its finest point, energy. So everything is energy.
Exactly.
So what we're talking about is bioenergy, energy of the body. It's not something that's out here or some esoteric thing. It's what physics call bioelectromagnetic. And one of the people that really made a lot of advancement, especially in researching and recording this, was Cyril W. Smith in England, a quantum physicist. And he proved the case many times over in many ways. I guess that's why in how many things like EMFs, RFs, and things like that negatively impact us. In this country, in the United States, where we're supposed to have freedom, they banned his book. So I actually had to contact him in England and get the book and study that.
Would you mind telling us his name again and the name of his book?
Cyril W. Smith, and his book is called Bioelectromagnetic Man.
Okay.
And the purpose that he stated with laying down the science and the studies and the other physicists that were involved, the main point of his book was to talk about the high wires and electric lines of how they're destroying us. But that knowledge leads to everything else. It's the same principles. That was actually before we had, our smartphones and everything else that are impacting us. And they banned his book. So I did get that from him. It's very dry reading. It's science. It's not for the public, but it revealed tremendous amount. And I continued my studies and exhausted everything that I could. And basically, trial and error, recording. I've written about a dozen books on TKM since then. And
can we have access to those books? Are they on your website?
They're on my website, yes.
And what is that?
The website is kinginstitute.org.
Okay.
So kinginstitute.org.
Just as people are tracking or listening, sometimes they're in front of computers, and I know they like to resource things right away. I'd like people to be able to do that.
Yes. Now, there are certain books, a variety that you can get, anyone can get. They don't have to know anything about this or anything else. But there are levels that have prerequisites to getting those. And the reason is the earlier books or the foundational books, they lay down the foundation for the understanding. And then everything else is built on that. So if you want something up here, you miss the foundation, you will not understand this.
That's right.
So it's a stair step.
I'm finding that when I try to explain R.E.S.T, why it's the philosophy and the theology of psychoneuroimmunology, I find that because people don't have a foundation, a basis, although it all makes sense to them, it's difficult to integrate. I totally relate to what you're saying, but in the most practical ways, tell us how this can become very practical to people listening. I'm listening to you and I'm captivated by what you're saying. And I'm wondering, okay, what does this mean to me?
When you say practical, what comes to mind for me is the obstacle that most people have. If they think, because if you don't do what I originally did and go bah humbug, if they think there is something to this, and it's very provable because there's many studies that we've done since then to prove it in science. We're about to release a peer-reviewed article with case series studies. So it's not just one, backed by medical doctors in that field for what we're talking about. For instance, stopping a heart attack in progress. And a key word there is consistently. I don't know of a time it has not worked. And it doesn't matter what type of heart attack or what severity.
Wow.
In other words, these are principles that if you apply them properly, they work, period. So practical, that's practical. Let me use that for an example since I've already brought it up. you could be a cardiologist, or you could be a lay person, you could be an herbologist, whatever. You don't have to have any information. If you've got two hands, and if you don't, literally, if you've got 2 feet, you can apply this. So let's stick with 2 hands, what most people have. You're just touching 2 locations. You don't have to think, say, or do any particular thing. You're making a connection that the body understands the touch and what it is supposed to do. In other words, reaction to touch. And when you do that, for instance, for stopping a heart attack in progress, you're holding the left little finger. It has to be left, and it's the entire finger. So you got 3 sections in the finger, and you got top and bottom and sides. You want to encompass that and hold as much of it as you can. And because this is America, and a lot of the philosophy is more is better, I even go all the way up into the hand for that entire digit. And the other hand, the right hand, is placed on the spinous process of thoracic vertebrae number 5. And then some people will get lost right there. So what you do is you touch at the base of your neck, and for what most people, there is what's called the bone there is a spinous process of T1. Well, you count down 5, and that's T5. But here's something even easier. What we found is if you're truly having a heart attack, and it's not a panic attack or something else, that during the heart attack, thoracic vertebrae number 5 will protrude out. So you'll be able to find it much easier. After the heart attack, it goes right back. I'm just mean during the process. So it will make it much easier. And practical, a child can do it.
Do you put for example, if I'm grabbing the left pinky with the right hand, do I put my left hand? Oh, so we grab the left pinky with the left hand.
Correct.
And then you put the right hand, so it's left to left, and you put the right hand, the fingers,
Finger
the tips of the finger pads.
Actually, the pads.
Okay, in the 5th vertebrae, on the 5th vertebrae.
Yes, and you don't need to rub, you don't need to press. All you need to do is touch.
Touch.
If you've got a shirt on, guess what? You don't have to take the shirt off. It will go right through the shirt. Now, if you have layered clothing in the winter and there's a big coat, I do suggest that to slide up under the coat and do that, because it could still work, but that's usually a lot of synthetics. And synthetics cause incoherence. Incoherence means if you're thinking of an oscilloscope and you have nice waves, and we're thinking of that's how your energy is functioning, then you have all this zag stuff of what we do to ourselves. That's what we do when we wear synthetics or blends. And that comes right back to Scripture, because it makes physicists scratch their head as to why, if you take something, I'm talking in that same correlation of coherence and what can disturb it. And I'll mention part of that as in what could interfere with that stopping a heart attack. If you have a watch or a bracelet or some metallic object on that left arm, or rings, as you'll notice, I don't have a metal wedding ring. I don't do that at any time. I don't have metal on me. I don't wear a belt buckle. Even with a suit, I have actually Velcro on a belt to use there, because I know the effect of the metal and the other things. So we have had cases where someone has tried to stop a heart attack, nurse or someone else, and they say, well, it maintained it, but it didn't eliminate it. And then they recognized that there was a watch on the wrist. They took the watch off, applied it again, and it stopped. Wow. Which is usually from 1 minute to 4 minutes maximum.
How about arthritis?
That is
a developing, I guess that's more of a chronic disease, but how would you intercept that?
That's part of the TKM language, because when you say arthritis, it's dealing with bone. We could look at all other things, but the aspects of the body, if you're thinking bone or muscle or fluids, so that deals with bone, and that's a category, what we call 5th stratum. So if I say stratum, you could exchange that terminology for category. And there's 5 categories that all of the functions of the body fit into from a TKM perspective and understanding, which also aligns biologically. There's 144,000 biochemical reactions in the body. Sounds like a rounded off number, but that's an exact number. Somebody got a revelation for that.
Yes, they did.
Yes.
That's what I was just thinking.
And
because it's consistent. It's consistent with the implications of that number in other settings.
Oh, yes. And there's 144,000 bioenergetic functions, a matching set. Okay, so the 5, basically you take the 144,000 functions and they are unevenly divided up into 5 categories. We call each category a stratum. Bone is the most dense category, and that's in 5th stratum, and it does relate to little finger. There are digits that relate to each stratum, and it's chronic. Let me think of it from an energetic perspective as densing down. In TKM, we talk about different levels of energy, even though it's still the bioelectromagnetic. There's plasma level, there's liquid level. You could think of it kind of like something easy would be like H2O. So if you have liquid H2O, that's water. If it's in a solid form, it's ice. If it's in a lighter form, it's steam or even vapor. But it's all the same thing. It's all H2O. So that's how the energy functions in the body. And bone would be its most dense form in 5th stratum. And it usually takes time to get to that point. It don't start in 5th stratum and mess up. It denses down more and more. So you look at arthritis as one of the more chronic issues, and you need to apply sequences to reverse that out. So let me say that there's a dozen books, and 99% of those are with full sequences, applications to deal with chronic and critical issues. There is a percent of that, like stopping a heart attack in progress, that anybody can apply. It's a 1-step, and you get results, 1 to 4 minutes. There's ones for stopping the seizure, stopping bleeding, whether it's internal or external, even a severed artery, and we have that on film even during surgery because they accidentally cut arteries. For asthma attacks and a variety of other things, even acute appendicitis. Now, acute appendicitis is one that is consistently reversed completely, but it normally takes, it's the longer application. It's not a 1-step process. The things I just mentioned, most of those are just a 1-step process, like stopping a heart attack. But acute appendicitis is a series of steps, what we call a sequence. And that needs to be applied very, very thoroughly for a confirmed severe acute appendicitis, and most likely repeated consecutively 3 times. I've never known anyone that's had to repeat it a 4th time. So what are we talking about? It could take 2-3 hours or a little more to 100% completely resolve acute appendicitis. And that's been confirmed medically and by surgery, because it happened with one child up in New York, and they called, asked what to do, and I told them, and they said, well, the doctors have said it's already ruptured, which, is very serious. Then you have to open them up and clean them out. But the mother of the child worked on that child through the night with TKM procedure, the same one to prevent it from rupturing. And that was my first experience. I did not know what it would do. In essence, when she's on the phone and she asked me, and he gave me that question, and I don't have a sequence for after it's ruptured, I said, Lord, what do I do? And he said, same thing. So I said, same thing. And then, as they typically do in the morning, they did take him into surgery. They opened him up, and the appendix was ruptured, but all the debris was cleaned up. There was just a small amount that had gathered as a ball in a pocket, and this is as the surgeon is reporting this back, that he's never seen anything like that ever or heard of it. That he just simply scooped up that debris, and that was it. If they'd have done a little longer, you wouldn't have had to do that. It would have self-cleaned it up. And what do you mean self? The body itself was cleaning it up and healing. That's God's design.
Wow.
So
That's fantastic. I was wondering if, for the sake of those listening, you covered the heart attack, but can you go through seizures and a few other of these ailments so people know how to respond?
Sure. And can use it immediately.
Immediately. Right.
You never know. Someone may be listening at this sometime and they have someone next to them that falls into a seizure. Go ahead and apply it. So for a seizure, you hold both thumbs, left and right thumbs, grasp the entire thumbs. Now, if it's a petit mal, which usually doesn't last very long, petit mal seizures, when you hold both thumbs, if I had so I'll hold mine, and it's like you're going to reach out and hold both thumbs.
Okay.
I would grasp them a little bit. And the reason is if it's a grand mal or something, they could be flailing around and you don't want them to pull out. So you're holding it for that purpose. You're not holding it because it takes that to work. So for a petit mal, which they usually don't do that, you touch it and usually instantaneously, a second or two, it stopped.
Wow.
For something like a grand mal, it may take a few minutes. It's much more complex. So any type of seizure, that's what you do. Now,
Hold both thumbs.
For petit mal, it's no problem. When they've stopped, you let go. But for a grand mal, literally there's lots, and I know this for personal experience, there's lots of trauma that happens and chaos. In the training for therapists, we check the 12 pulses, and they're not the 12 acupuncture pulses. And that's a whole training in itself. But if you check that right after somebody's had a seizure, and simple, that 144,000 functions that I mentioned, they're all chaotic. It's just chaos. So that's why I say for a major seizure, when they become conscious, even when they have eye contact, there may still be a little seizure activity. Do not let go of the thumbs.
Okay.
Wait until they're conscious. The feeling comes back. They can recognize where they're at. They know time and they feel stable. Their pupils are like they should be and even because the pupils will be off. So make sure everything is very stable. Then you can let go.
What exactly is happening when you're holding onto the thumbs?
There's several things involved. For the time to keep it simple, if you study the spine and see one and the correlations to that with your spinal nerves, that deals with unconsciousness. And at the outer edge of you've got your spinous process, but you have two bones that stick out from that vertebrae on the edges. And at those locations, we have what we call energy spheres, which you could say points. They're locations that we call number 4. And that governs how that area works. And that deals with unconscious. Well, if you have a grand mal seizure, you're unconscious. Or if you're knocked out or you pass out or even medically induced in a coma, which we've worked with people from burns that have been. You work with the 4s by touching them with other points to revive the functioning, and they revive consciousness. So we've also done that with people that have been in coma, some for short periods, days, and some for several months to get them to revive. The ones several days, they revive very quick. I don't mean in minutes. I mean it could be a day or two.
This is really complex and it has many layers, very involved. Do you have classes, coursework? What do you have? Do you have training?
Yes, we have layers of training basically dependent upon the interest. And we're working right now with the texts, which, it's not all a matter of what the texts say, because if it was according to the text, within the first quarter of next year, we'll have it up. but we're going to have a TKM Academy for people to go through the entire complete training and get a degree.
Good.
But right now, what we have is on our website, and we have the education. We have flash drives, DVDs, books, lots and lots of handouts. We have that anybody can access those, and we have 4 Rumble channels that literally have hundreds of videos on them. We have some of those that you can access from the homepage of our website at thatkinginstitute.org. So there is ongoing education. It just depends on how far you want to go with it.
What are the Rumble channels?
If one easy way is if you go to Rumble, and in the search bar in Rumble, you just type King Institute, 2 words. That's all.
Okay.
And click enter. You'll see 3 of our 4 Rumble channels pop up on the left. And you can click either one of those to get different things. One of them is called King Institute TKM, and that's a series I'm going through now with a podcast that we're spending at least an hour per page in level 1 and 2 to talk about what I don't teach in class, because like you said, it's very in-depth. And even in our 5-day, all-day class for an introductory class, that's 1 level, you don't have time to teach everything.
Exactly. No, I know we're going through the pains of that. Let me ask you something. For those listening right now, what is the most valuable thing you can give a novice that's hearing for the first time, wow, a physics approach rather than a biological approach to healing?
Yes, that's non-invasive, non-toxic, and consistent. And the more chronic or complicated a situation is, obviously it's not going to be done in a couple of minutes. But this is something I've provided for your question that you just said. If they go to the website, and in the main menu, there's a tab called Resources.
Okay.
And it has a couple of drop-down menus. So Resources, and then next click Print Media. And when you click Print Media, there will be one that says Free Downloads. And that'll bring you to a page where there's a variety of things. If you go to the bottom part of that page, there's some free TKM applications that you can download. One of them is called Median Sequence. And I'm not saying medium. I'm saying median as in the middle, like what's in the middle of the street, because it works on the middle pathway in the body. And it's an 8-step process that explains how to do it, that anybody, any age, that can read and move their hands can apply it. And if they do that, they're going to, in a general, broad way, help 144,000 functions. And it gives you something you can test and try out.
Fantastic.
We hope listening to this episode has brought you closer to experiencing the freedom of wholeness and healing. If you have questions or comments about today's episode, or for updates about R.E.S.T, please visit our Instagram or Facebook at The Place of R.E.S.T. If you would like more information about Virginia, or to support and join the cause of R.E.S.T, please go to theplaceofrest.com/donate or call 949-289-5935. Thank you for listening to R.E.S.T with Virginia Dixon. We'll see you next week.